Novelist and science fiction writer Iain Banks.
Iain Banks made a sensational debut with The Wasp Factory in 1984. Since then, he's published 4 other novels, and his 6th novel will appear in August. Iain Banks, I've seen you quoted as saying that you aim to write novels that have a commercial edge without insulting the intelligence. What do you mean by that, a commercial edge without insulting the intelligence?
Well, simply that I want to write novels that are going to entertain, and without being sort of too inversely snobbish about it. I sometimes feel this idea that if something makes you laugh or is too entertaining, then it can't really be too serious. There's something wrong with it. It's not sort of fit to be looked at in serious terms in the quality dailies or Sundays, whatever. I do want to write books that are entertaining. I'm not writing books to win prizes or even to win great accolades in critical columns, whatever. I'm writing books to be read.
I mean, does this mean that, when you're writing a novel, you have your market in mind?
Not really. I mean, it's I'm just trying to write the sort of books I would like to read.
Yeah.
So I'm aiming for a very small audience in the end of one myself. I'm just trying to write.
I mean, I suspect most people actually write books that they themselves would like to read.
I think so. I sometimes worry that people aren't. This is what does worry me. I feel that at either end of the market, there do seem to be writers who are writing not to entertain, not to even please themselves, but to please other people, and that is what their aim is set upon.
Do you think it is possible to write something which works even in its own terms if you are consciously writing down?
I think it is. Take 2 of the books. The Bridge was written at one level in a way, and the Espadeur Street, the book after that, it was not in terms of the publishing sequence, was written in a much more sort of deliberately sort of conversational style. It's a far less complicated book. The Bridge has got this very, very intensely worked out structure, and it's all about dreams and symbols and images and all the rest of it. Espadeur Street's at one level is almost just a very sort of basic love story, and it's an expose, but a look at the higher echelons of the pop and rock music industry. And I would say that I wasn't deliberately writing down to write Espadeur Street. It was simply I knew that it had a less complicated plot, if you like, a less complicated thing I was really trying to do. And therefore that book, I would say there's less in it to analyse, there's less in it in terms of simply that structural complexity.
So I mean, a different subject demands a different style?
I think so, yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it does. It's simply a matter then of how, if one is to match one's own talents, whatever, and abilities to what that set actually demands.
The Wasp Factory, where the narrator has casually murdered 3 of the family and plans elaborate wars against animals which he enjoys torturing and killing, was compared by some to a video nasty. I mean, do you like shocking people?
I don't, and that's the funny thing. I remember writing The Wasp Factory, about halfway through I thought this is really quite boring. I don't think I was actually going to like this very much. It's amazing how once you've planned a book, you started writing it, and the character almost starts to become sympathetic, having set out with the idea that Frank was just a complete monster. You sort of actually sort of...
But if you write about somebody in the first person, is it possible to do so without having a sympathy with that person?
I suspect not. No, I think in the end you're almost bound to find that you do develop some. I developed rather more than I expected for Frank. But no, I wasn't. I don't enjoy shocking people for the sake of it. I would never shy away from shocking people if I thought it was necessary for what the book was trying to do. I was not deliberately trying to shock people in the Wasp Factory. In a sense, I did not sit down and think, aha, how can we shock people? And this is the way to do it. I think in this sense, a book's a bit like a child that goes away from home, and the Wasp Factory has gone out into the big bad world and been quite successful. Certainly the most successful of the books so far, I'd say. And it's come back and to think, oh my God, it's got punk hair or whatever, and safety pins through its nose. And now I thought I was writing a book that was a sort of pro-feminist, anti-militarist, macho, military machine, sort of a diatribe against that, and I say pro-feminist, and using the violence against, specifically against the animals, to try and make that point. It turns out in the end, I just have to accept, I suppose, that despite my best intentions, what I ended up writing to some extent was a upmarket horror novel, which it was not meant to be.
But there again, I mean, partly perhaps because it is in the first person, the relish with which the narrator writes about his war against the animals invites the reader to join him.
I think it does, yes. I mean, there's one thing that there's a slim possibility that The Wasp Factory might eventually become a film, and in the sequence, I think a lot of people find most disturbing that happens in real time in the book, when Frank sort of decimates the local rabbit population. We had him talking as though it was an American airstrike on a Vietnamese village, and he was bringing the napalm and all the rest of it. That's when he brings out his petrol bombs and all the rest of it. Partly because very few people seem to take up on the idea that this was an image, if you like, of man's inhumanity to man. In the film, we're trying to sort of point that out much more clearly and say, look, this is what it's being compared to, because it didn't seem to get across to people. in the book. Well, that I think in the end is mea culpa. That was my fault that it didn't come across that easy.
Well, I think
So
it's a difficulty of writing about violence from the point of view of the person who is perpetrating the violence rather than from the point of view of the victim, is that you are inviting the reader to participate in the violence, and in fact you are making an appeal to whatever is sadistic in the reader.
I think that's true, and I wouldn't have been comfortable doing that at all if it hadn't been for the fact that you're eventually going to find out the violence that had been done to Frank himself halfway through the book, and then later on you find out the full truth, and it turns out Frank's whole life has been a lie. I think once you consider the book as a totality, then I think then you can sort of really evaluate that. But at the same time, I was trying not to make Frank too sort of sympathetic in other ways. I mean, he's utterly misogynistic in terms of the things that he says about literally comparing women to animals. And that was one thing that was always meant to say, well, if anybody's going to identify with this person, they're going to be pretty sort of sick and mixed up anyway. Then we get to the end, and
if you get to the end.
Well, if you get to that, of course, is a problem, yes. And if you don't, if it doesn't carry you through, then certainly I failed. And I guess there are quite a few people who didn't get that far. And, well, as I say, you can't win them all. I apologise. But once you do get there, then the people who have felt abhorrence of what Frank's expressing come to some sort of understanding of why, and it suddenly starts to make sense. And the people who've been identifying with them, I would hope, suddenly get a real sort of shock to the system. So, I would sort of justify it in that way, but I wouldn't say it was a book that I was entirely comfortable with. I knew it was going to cause something of a stir. In fact, it turned out to cause a vastly greater storm than I was expecting. It was a Beaufort Force 10 rather than sort of gentle breeze or whatever.
But there were commercial advantages in it.
There were indeed, I can't deny it, yes. What it eventually boiled down to was I was able to give up work more or less at the time the book came out, because I knew I was going to make enough money over the next couple of years through a paperback deal and foreign deals and so on. Yes, I mean, it had commercial advantages in the sense that the book caused such a furore or whatever that...
I mean, the curious thing is that although one would have the impression from this that you actually do like shocking people, I mean, I also think of you as a romantic writer, and even in some ways a rather sentimental one.
Yeah, I'll have to keep my guard against sentimentality.
I mean, there's the sort of the idea of mateship between men and pubs and so on, which comes out through in quite a few of them, and the ending of Espadelle Street is good Hollywood stuff, isn't it?
Just about, yeah. I mean, it is. That was one thing I was very sort of concerned about, especially at the ending of Espadelle Street, was it did look as it was all going to be happy ever after. I mean, that was fine in the last sentence. I think it actually says, wondering if it'll last, whatever. And I think that the whole dynamic of weird sort of life has been that nothing really lasts, But at least he's found some sort of, vision of happiness and stability.
I mean, how do you feel about happy endings?
Dubious. I think this is not the time of the century, whatever, happy endings to that extent. I don't want to be a constant sort of doom and gloom merchant, but I would actually say that the Wasp Factory has a semi-happy ending in the sense that, none of the main protagonists actually get killed, and Frank's come to an understanding of his own sort of place in the world and the truth of what's actually happened to him.
It's a happy ending in the sense of being happier than what's gone before.
Yes, okay, it's relative, yeah. Yes. Walking on Glasses, we've got 3 endings. And
you see, in that one, which I find in some ways the most interesting of them, there you're setting out to tell 3 very different stories which are being told in very different styles. I mean, one is the story of Graham Park as a naturalist, Stephen Grout. I mean, that's a sort of black comedy one, isn't it?
Yes.
And the Quist is fantasy.
Yes, Chris and Jai is the fantasy part.
I mean, do you see all these as equally valid ways of treating life?
No, I think in the end the most valid way is to treat it realistically. But I think there are grounds for looking at other aspects of one's life than you normally have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Getting up and putting your shoes on in the morning, which it's a benefit to look at from other angles, as it were. And that's simply an attempt to do that, and that's meant to be a gradation between complete as complete as I can make it at time reality, and then complete fantasy, which is neither here nor there. It's set in another time. It turns out in the end it's meant to be Earth, millions of years in the future, but that's really beside the point. And just trying to look at similar ideas, as I say, from those different angles about loss and about trying to find your place in the world, or a love or whatever, from those different angles. So I think it's still, in the end, it still works. Now, well, it works in the sense that I'm quite happy to leave the book as a conundrum. I don't think you should have to always explain everything, providing you're giving enough interest anyway.
Do you also think of yourself as a comic writer? There are very funny scenes in all these novels.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think life, like writing, is far too important to be taken entirely seriously. I think you have to quite a few people have said they thought the Wasp Factory was extremely funny. That's fair enough. Black humour or whatever. Yes, but I think that life, God, goodness knows, in the entire 20th century is so dark. There's this despair and suffering. I think.
Do you think so? Isn't that an exaggeration?
A hell of a lot of it is. Yes, I mean, just in terms of. I mean, I've lived a very comfortable, pleasant life and all the rest of it. No one's ever shot at me or wanted to touch me or anything else. But from so many people, that.
But why in the 20th century?
Well, I think we've sort of got better at it, if you like. But in humanity, we've sort of managed to sort of. It's been the Industrial Revolution of inhumanity and suffering.
I think that's a very romantic view.
It may well be. Perhaps my heart, means the cynical exterior, it's the heart of a true romantic. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still working out, actually.
Do you feel very much in tune with the times? And do you think you're a writer for today very much? Is that the reason for your commercial success?
I suppose there must be something in that, yes. And there must be enough people, a significant minority, I suppose, who feel the same way I do. I certainly don't feel in tune with something like Thatcherism or monetarism or Reaganism and like that. I mean, I'm a sort of, paid up lefty,
But you say your novels as political?
Not as political as I'd like them to be. Not really. I don't think I embody politics within the structure of the novels as such. It's something I would like to do in the end. I'm hoping I might be able to do that with the next book, which is going to be a political thriller set in Central America, in the Panama Canal, in fact. But I'm still sort of doing research for that, so it's a good long way away from even when we started.
But you see, I mean, one of the things that troubles me in this is that you talk of the political content and Thatcherism, Reaganism, and so on, but the novels also reveal an obvious relish for violence.
I don't relish. I don't particularly. I don't know.
I mean, some people might even call it fascist, the relish for violence.
Oh, gosh, I hope not. I would say it's a relish for it. Partly it's almost a defence mechanism, I think, just to acknowledge that there is that amount of violence out there.
Yes, but it's the point of view from which the violence appears very often.
I think it depends again on which novel. As a rule, apart from Frank in the Wasp Factory, I think most of them the violence is more done to than done by the central characters, whatever.
I mean, the problem of violence is obviously a very difficult one for novelists to handle, because you can't pretend it doesn't exist. And yet, if you dwell on it, you can very often be inviting the reader to identify with it. I mean, you could think of the 30s gangster films.
Certainly, yes. I mean, the gangsters are as romantic, dashing figures, and the cops are usually extremely sort of dull and slow
and not only that, but you are being asked to approve the violence. When Cagney, it's a small scene, but that one in is it Little Caesar, when he takes the grapefruit and squashes it in his girlfriend's face. Yes. You're being asked to approve that, not to disapprove it.
I agree,
you're on his side. And I have this uncomfortable feeling with your work, too.
That's unfortunate. I've been trying not to do that, in fact, especially just since the Wasp Factory, because I knew it was going to have that sort of effect. Most of the time, in fact, the characters are fairly out of control of their own lives, and therefore, I assume any violence is done to them. The bit where in the bridge scene where the guy's sort of beaten up, I'd say, is fairly sort of unpleasant. There's any sort of idea that he's enjoying it,
yes.
Even in the way that the doorman's enjoying it.
But it's rather like, do you remember that Brando film, The Chase? Have you ever seen that one? Where there's a sheriff in the southern states, and he's a good man, and he's defending a black against a lynching mob. And the local rednecks come in and beat him up. And it's a horrible scene. And yet somehow you're being asked to enjoy it, because there's a sort of sadomasochistic side to it. And that is what I find in so much writing about violence.
No, I wouldn't really accept that. I would defend myself against it. So I say that there are certainly problems with the Wasp Factory where...
I think the problem is that's in the bridge, too.
Well, I just say it comes across as a rather unpleasant experience, but it's not really dwelt on. Again, it's not particularly... I don't really go into any great detail in it. There's probably more problem, in fact, with the science fiction book I consider Fleabus, where there's a couple of bits where there is quite a lot of violence. Again, I would say it's there for a specific purpose, and it's part of the same sort of rather sort of anti-religious sort of slant that the Wasp Factory's got as well.
What's your own background?
I was born in Dunfermline in Fife, and brought up there. My father worked in the Admiralty. He started out as an able seaman on the boom boats. He became a mate eventually. He's now retired. My mother was an ex-professional ice skater in the chorus line of some of the touring ice shows during the late 40s. We moved through to Gourock, where my parents still live. I went to Stirling University, did English along with philosophy and a little bit of psychology. Finally came away with an English degree, clutched in my sweaty palm. Did various sort of wee daft jobs, like portering and estate worker. And for 6 months I was an expediter analyzer in IBM, which is IBM for clerk. And yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. But eventually, I did a bit of travelling around, did Europe and did America, and finally the supply of wee daft jobs gradually sort of trickled away to nothing in Inverclyde. So in December '79, I went down to London. Finally got a job as a law costs draftsperson with a big firm of lawyers in London. I did that for 4 years, and then the Wasp Factory was finally published on. It was actually on my 30th birthday, which had been my private sort of deadline for. Making something of myself down in London, other than a complete fool. And if I couldn't, I was going to come back up here. So it was nice that it was right on my 30th birthday.
How conscious are you of Scottish heritage? I mean, the literary one. Or do you think you've escaped all that?
I don't know. I guess I've escaped it in the sense that I wouldn't say that you get very much sort of benefit from trying to look at what I've written in terms of the Scottish tradition. It's something that I feel actually rather lacking in, because I really don't feel that I know enough about Scottish literature. And it's the old story. I mean, you go away from Scotland, and I was away for, let's say, 8 years, despite, coming back frequently. I appreciate the place so much more, with the people and the scenery, the landscape, and also just being, I actually feel Scottish. I remember one time, when I was, I don't know, must have been very early teens or perhaps even slightly younger, saying to my parents, I think of myself as British first and Scottish second, which I'm actually slightly ashamed of now.
There's a scene at the end of the bridge, or near the end of the bridge, when a character's reflecting on Fife, or the Kingdom of Fife, and on Scotland in relation to ancient civilizations. And he thinks, by the time we were ready to play our part, it was already too late. We were always too soon or too late, and the best things we've done have been for other people. And he goes on to brood about sentimental Scottishness. Is that just him, or is it partly you?
That's partly me, definitely, yes. I would stand by that, but with caveats, provisos, if you like, of saying that it's more complicated in the end. But as much information as you can get into something that long, I would stand by that. Yes, that is me.
You write with terrific bravura in different styles.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, do you think there's a danger of self-indulgence in the virtuoso passages?
Definitely, yes, and that is why, again, Espadrille Street was more the book it was, because the bridge, if you sort of plot, on a graph, the level of writing and complexity from the Wasp Factory through Walking on Glass to the bridge, you go off into absolute self-indulgence and indeed self-parody if you try to maintain that level. So in Espadrille Street, I was trying to write in a much more simple way. That, it's much more conversational in the way the story is told.
And is that the way you think you're going to develop?
No, I don't. I think that's just the way I would want to do it at that time. I would like in the end to do something as controlled and structured, but at the same time as I don't know, wild, strange as the bridge again. But I want to know it's going to be. It's not going to be a repeat performance, and it's not. And it is going to be. It's still going to be sane, I suppose. It's going to have some sort of clarity. And it's something that I had to sort of work out my system. With the I think it was 5 novels before the Wasp Factory. I've been writing since I was 16, and I look back now at some of the stuff, and it's hilariously funny. But appalled I ever had the cheek and the nerve to send it off to publishers because there's at least 3 adjectives where one would do. So yes, I know that.
Are you afraid of using up material?
No, at the moment I'm trying to sort of work out ways to get rid of it. To some extent, I mean, some books like The Bridge, to a degree, I've been writing about my own life, and so I've probably written as much as I can up to that point. But you keep meeting new people, and especially at the moment, I suppose, I'm living a much more intense life than I might have stayed as a law cost draftsman. Only, of course, I don't want to start writing about what it's like to be a semi-famous author, and going on literary tours and all that. But just meeting other people,
I mean, an awful lot of writers, novelists, don't start till they're middle-aged, and they draw on 25 years or 20 years of adult experience. And you're drawing on less adult experience at the moment you start writing.
Yes.
And you haven't, I think, to be fair to say, really dealt with adult relationships yet.
Not well. I think it's sort of coming out, certainly in The Bridge and a bit in Espadrille Street, yes. But there's still that slight feel of people have still got some growing to do, which I certainly think I have as well. With some justification being called a big kid, whatever. Can't deny it.
What I was getting at is, I mean, other people who've had early success, Scott Fitzgerald is one obvious example. In Scotland, James Kennaway is another, have found problems in that they were having to create the novel almost while they were writing it. Create the material for it while they're writing it.
What I find is that as you do get older, it's not simply that, say you're going to write a book every year, you've only got that year's experience to go, and what happens is that you start to reevaluate and look back on the experience you've had throughout, your life. And you suddenly start to see little patterns, working themselves out there. So you can, in a sense, every year, if you like, you can go back and reevaluate, and there'll always be something new to be said, even about the things you've already written about. So in the end, no, I'm not too worried about running out of material. I'm looking forward to, looking at things in
40 years of novels.
Well, I hope so, yes. But I'd quite like to do, I'd like to branch out into music for that matter. But certainly
Films?
Yes, I'd like to in the end. Perhaps television, I don't know. There's even talk of doing some stuff with graphic novels, which this is the mature form of comics, which are supposedly the coming thing. I had offers in that way. That certainly offers some food for thought, I think. I'd like to do something like that and get that visual element into a story. It depends. It would only work for certain stories, not for others. But I had it very cogently argued at one point that Walking on Glass would be a far better graphic novel than it would have that it did a novel,
So we look for a graphic novel.
Well, you never know.
Thank you.
Allan Massie was talking to the novelist and science fiction writer Iain Banks. The producer was Elizabeth Burke.